Good morning. Someone put this up here, and it says "sexy senior citizen." And just as the antidote to this, I would like to tell you what one of my favorite stories is these days. Some of you have heard the story from me, but some of you know everything I could possibly say, so. But this concerns an older man walking down the street, and he hears a voice saying, "Psst, could you help me out?" And he looks around and there's nobody there. "Psst, could you help me out?" No people. And as he's looking around, he looks down and there is a huge frog. And he says to the frog, he's a little embarrassed to talk to a frog, but he said, "Did you speak to me?" Frog said, "Yeah, could you help me out?" Man says, "Well, what do you want?" Frog said, "Well, I'm under a curse. And if you would kiss me, I would be freed of the curse, and I would turn into a beautiful, beautiful woman who would love to serve you, take care of you, warm your bed, make you so happy." So the man stood there for a moment, reflecting, and then he picked up the frog and he put it in his pocket and he walked on. And after a little while, the frog said, "Hey, you forgot to kiss me." And the man said to the frog, "You know, at my stage of life, I think it's more interesting to have a talking frog." Well, let me add my welcome to Tom's. This is an adventure. And I'll tell you how I happen to be doing this workshop. A few years ago, I was on a train coming from Westport, Connecticut to New York City. And it was a train that ran late at night. And so you had to buy your ticket on the train. So I was on the train, and low-lit coach, reflecting about the beautiful day I just had with a very dear friend walking in the autumn New England autumn. And the conductor came along and he said, tickets, and I said, I have to buy my ticket on the train. And he said, what kind of ticket do you want? And I said, do I have a choice? He said, yes. I said, what is the choice? He said, regular or senior citizen. I mean, that had never even entered my mind. So I said, senior citizen? And I said it with the same tone of questioning that I did when I was 18 years old and I went into a New York bar to get a beer and I knew they wouldn't serve me. So it was, a beer? Which they then asked for my identification. I proudly showed my license that I was 18 years old. The conductor didn't ask for any identification. He just gave me this ticket, and I said, how much is that? He said, $4.50. I said, what is the regular one? He said, $7. So I was pleased. And then as he walked down away from me, I began to think, I'm a senior citizen. I'm a senior citizen. I mean, I'm a senior citizen. And I had never put those two things together, senior citizen and I. I mean, there were senior citizens, I knew that. But the idea that I was a senior citizen absolutely blew my mind. And as I thought, well, I am a senior citizen. I mean, chronologically, my body is 62 years old at that time. And I slowly let myself feel my way into being a senior citizen. Like, what does it feel like, you know? And I sort of contracted a little bit, and my shoulders bent a bit, and I kind of, you know, I mean, I didn't do it extreme, but I just started to feel the society defines me as old. And I saw that I was putting on a cloak or a coat or a suit that had an awful lot of excess meaning to it. It had a lot of attitudinal things to it that I had never considered before, that went on when you said, I am a senior citizen, or I am an old person in this society, or an older person in this society. And I felt like, I'm not sure I want to put on this coat until I know what I'm putting on. Now, as I began to look around in the society I was living, I found out that to become a senior citizen or an old person in the society was not necessarily a bargain. That our society really is so youth-oriented that it treats older people as, quote, less than. A few years ago, I was in India, and I'd come back to visit a lot of old devotees of my guru and Indians, and I was traveling around. I came up into this village, and I met one of my old devotee friends, brothers, and we hugged, and he looked at me, and he says, "You're looking much older." And at first, I went through, what do you mean I'm looking older? You know? And then there was something that was dissonant in what I was hearing. And as I listened, I heard that he was saying it as in a statement of respect, not a statement of diminishment. He was saying, you're looking older, which is because in that society, elders in the villages are treated with great respect. And it was a mark of accomplishment that I was older. Now, his behavior was culturally acceptable to him. What threw me off was my reaction, which showed me how much I had bought into the culture in which I was living. When somebody says, you're looking older, and you go, unless you're 12 years old, or 16 or something like that. And what I realized at that point was that that I would have to be mindful of the situation very carefully. The image I'm trying to convey is the experiments they've done. I seem to be on a frog trip this morning. The experiments they did with frogs, you probably all know, where if you take if you put a frog into very hot water, it will jump out immediately. But if you put it into cool water and then heat it very slowly, the frog will slowly boil to death without making the distinction if you heat the water slow enough. And what I recognized was that unless I was very mindful, I was going to boil to death into a model of aging and dying that the culture had, that I was just going to unconsciously slide into. And it would have to do with power, it would have to do with social role, it would have to do with how you dealt with physical conditions, it would have to do with a whole raft of economic, political things. Is that clear? Do you understand what I'm trying to convey here? And as I looked at the society, I saw that a lot of the role models of aging were basically people who were proving that they could stay young. And that was when I thought about it, that was quite bizarre. I mean, it was wonderful. Everybody was climbing mountains and playing golf, and, there's wonderful sisters doing yoga at 100 and whatever they are. Except the wonderful, this wonderful image in the newspaper a few weeks ago of the oldest woman, she's 120 in France, I guess. And they said to her, what do you expect your future to be? And she said, very short. I couldn't tell whether that was just actuarial charts or wishing. In the course of the last 30 years of my life, 34 years, I have been on what could be called a spiritual journey, a journey of consciousness. And in the course of that journey, I have understood a metaphysics and a reason for cultivating certain states of mind. And I've done a lot of spiritual practices. And in the course of those practices, one of the ways I've used those practices is to re-examine places that I was caught in life, like in anger or fear or whatever psychodynamics they were, of bringing them up into a certain kind of consciousness space and reflecting about them and, in a way, decathecting them or taking the energy, the blocked energy away from them by just seeing them for what they were with a quiet mind. And I've done that with a lot of things that were deep in me historically. But as I approached this issue of aging, I saw that I was going to have the opportunity now to bring these spiritual practices to bear on a process that was just beginning to happen. Instead of something that had happened a long time ago that I was undoing, I was going to be able to watch a process happen. I was going to watch myself slide into, I'll give you an example. While I am, my body is now 63. I have to remember what it's doing. My image of myself has nothing to do with that, my psychological image. So a few months ago, I was speaking in Denver, Colorado, and the stage was about this high. And I came along and I looked at the stage and I leaped up on the stage, which is what I had always done. The predicament was the stage was a little higher than I had anticipated, and my leap wasn't quite as buoyant as it used to be. And I hit my shin against the stage and was thrown back on my behind. So the air was knocked out of me, but I got up gamely, smiling at everybody. I mean, here you are in front of 800 people, and I'm lying on the floor, and I'm about to speak. And I get up, and I smile, and I hug people, and I'm, old Ram Dass. And then they begin to introduce me, and as they introduce me, I feel this dampness in my shoe, and I look down, and I see this thing is bleeding, and my sock is all bloody, and they're just saying, and here's Ram Dass. So I got up on the stage and I took a napkin and I sort of spread it over my legs so people didn't have to watch the bleeding. I mean, it wasn't terribly bad. I could bleed. And I stuck some napkins in my sock and I gave the lecture. Now, but having fallen, I developed a huge black and blue mark. I mean, really a Rorschach type ink blot sort of thing on my whole behind here, right? Plus this big dent in my leg. And it turned out the next week, I was down in Santa Barbara at a person's, at a conference up at a beautiful home up in the hills. And it came time to go to bed, and I was living in a little cabin up on the hill, and I came out of the main house, and there was no moon, and I didn't have my flashlight, but I remembered the place was in that direction, and it was up a hill, and it was pitch dark, and I started looking up at the stars, and I got fascinated with the stars and turning around, and apparently I redirected myself. And when I walked, instead of walking up a hill, I walked off a cliff. And I rolled down these rocks, my glasses flying, my shoes flying, and I landed upside down in the pitch black with my glasses gone, and I had been bumping down my neck, and stars had been shooting out of my head. And so I realized I was still movable. I mean, I moved each thing, and it still moved, and that was grace. And I slowly got up, and I climbed back up, and I went to my cabin, got a flashlight, came back, found my flashlight and my shoe, and went to bed. The result was that this side became totally black and blue, and I got a big bump on my spine. Well, for me, that was all kind of interesting. That's the way I treated it. How interesting. I'm alive, I'm well. Now I think when I look at these situations, I'm losing my consciousness. I'm not aware. I mean, at that point when I leaped up on the stage, I wasn't really aware of the situation. I was lost in a model of myself, a fantasy of who I used to be or something like that. And falling off the hill was because I couldn't see and I was too ego proud to call for help or anything. So I was finding it interesting and saying the reason I hurt myself was because my ego got in the way. I've got to get to work on this. But my friends responded entirely differently. They started like a campaign. They didn't conspire. They just started a campaign of, be careful. Are you all right? Here, let me help you. You going out? Do you want me to go with you? I couldn't believe it. I mean, it rolled over me like molasses. This whole kind of infantilizing, well-meaning. Oh, it was so well-meaning. I mean, they love me so much, you know. They're going to put me in a box and move me around, you know, prematurely. But it was fascinating to me how much, and I found myself, as they did that, I found myself reacting to that, besides saying, like, what are you, out of your mind? But I was also reacting by, I think I better be a little more careful. I started to see it affecting my consciousness. Maybe I can't do that. I'll do that tomorrow instead of today. Now that's okay, except that it wasn't coming out of a conscious place. It was coming out of a fear that they had imbued in me about myself as a result of these experiences. Now you can hear all the sides of that issue, and their side and my side and all of it. But what I have begun to notice is that as there are changes in the body with aging, and as there are changes in the outer perception of me, I can feel that people's attitudes towards me are changing, and the ways in which they are responding to me are changing. Some of them are great. I mean, I used to say wise things 30 years ago, and everybody said, he's just a kid, don't listen to him. Now I say them, and everybody says, oh, yes, because he must be very wise because he's old. I mean, just because you're old doesn't mean you're an elder. I want you to know. Now, that's by way of just introduction to why I've become interested in this field. Because as I looked around in the society, I was awed by what I'd call the dysfunctional mythology about aging in our society. I'd say it in one way that we have an average age increasing every year. We are becoming an older and older society. What with the baby boomers becoming 50 and 90, starting to be 50 in 1996, the whole demography of the culture is moving. And yet we have a culture that focuses and values youth. So that more and more people, a larger and larger percentage of the people, are becoming disempowered by the mythology. And we obviously need another mythology. Now, we can gain it as the numbers change just by sheer power. I mean, the AARP is, I mean, that's, you know, we may be, but every bus is going to be a kneeling bus and every senator is going to be a kneeling senator before we're done. Because we have the votes. And what we have the votes for is for economic and political clout. And that's one level of the game, and that's a very interesting level of the game, and that does change the mythology, there's no doubt about it. Numbers changes your power base. But the thing our society doesn't have is any understanding of the uniqueness of the stages of life and the difference in a stage of life that is in which you're an older person in relation to when you're a younger person, the differences in agenda, the differences in contribution to the society, the differences in what your own inner work is about. And this is not true across all societies. Most societies have rituals of initiation that take you from one stage of life to another. There's the rituals of the baptism or the bris at the beginning of the game. There's the rituals of the confirmation or the bar mitzvah or the going out into the jungle by yourself or out into the mountains by yourself at the time of being a teenager as you enter adulthood. There are rituals. There's the marriage ritual. There are rituals when your last child, in some cultures, when your last child is grown, there is a ritual for the woman at that stage in which she is freed from a certain role. And it's all structured in the society so that you know where you are. We don't have those kinds of rituals. We have a gold watch at retirement. We have, you start to receive Social Security. These are interesting kinds of rituals. They kind of lack a certain heart space. They don't have much power to really help us shift in a way with respect or with dignity. Now, because I've lived in India a great deal, I'm very tuned to what they call the ashramas, or the stages of life. And in India, the ashramas are defined so that from 0 to 20, you are a student, you learn. From 20 to 40, you marry and you have children. You're a householder. From 40 to 60, you start to let your children take over your business or whatever you do, and you start to do practices and pilgrimages and things like that. And at 60 years old, you let go of all attachments to family, to everything, and you're a sannyas, you're a wandering free being. And the society is designed so that when you are 20 to 40, your goal if you're doing your spiritual practices, is to make as much money as you can. And with that money, what you do is you support the students, the older people, and the holy people. That's your work. That's the way you gain spiritual merit from 20 to 40. So the game works because everybody takes care of everybody else. It's what Social Security is supposed to be for us. And it will be for a few more years. As the demography changes, it's going to be a new game. So when I became 60, I had a fleeting thought, I'm entering a new ashram because of my Indian training. And I thought, well, now I should let go of everything. Close up things. Close doors, latch things, go through old papers, do all that. And I tried to milk that for several months. But it just wasn't in harmony with my being at all. It just wasn't in harmony. Partly, it is not in harmony with our culture. And partly, nobody's going to support me if I do that. And partly, those ashramas were describing a culture in which the average age expectancy of life was about 45 years old. So the numbers of people that got to be 60 were extremely few. But now we have a whole new ballgame here. Technology has increased the number of years we can fear death. And we can look for ways to be relevant. And the promise that we're going to go to 100, I just read an article in Scientific American that says there's no reason why we shouldn't be living to, all of us living 90, 100, 110. And we will slowly, technology will get us to that point. Some of you are saying, oh my God, enough already. Do I have to? Some of you are saying, this is going to be very interesting. Wow, what's going to open up for me? I mean, let's say, you know about eccentricity, about how when you get old you can get eccentric. You can sort of let it all hang out because you realize you had been uptight for all the wrong reasons for so long. You were busy pleasing everybody, and finally you don't give a damn, so the hell with it, and here we go, and you relax. Imagine you had 40 years of that. You could really develop a style for being eccentric, you know? Well, the general thing I saw, and the reason that I think I'm attempting to do this kind of a workshop and doing a book on aging, is because I said to myself, if you've been spending 30 years cultivating inner qualities in your being and on what you'd call a spiritual journey or a journey of consciousness, what relevance does that have to how you are now going to age? And I really wanted to explore how to bring the work I had done to bear on these new experiences that were beginning to happen to me in my life. And because what I saw was that all of the spiritual practices said, in effect, as the Buddha had pointed out in his first sermon in the deer park after he became enlightened, he said, there is immense suffering in the nature of form. The suffering that individuals experience is the result of the way in which their mind clings. It's created by the mind. And if you change the way the mind works, you change the nature of the experiences of life. And thus there is the possibility that you, through the discipline of your own mind, can free yourself from suffering. I'm not talking about freeing the world from suffering yet. That's a little metaphysical leap, but just take yourself. It is possible to extricate your awareness from an identification with things, something, and we're going to talk about that, in such a way that you, who you say I, when you say I, what that I represents, can look at the world that is going by and not get caught in it, and ergo, not suffer. Is this too weird, or can you hear what I'm saying? Did I leap too much? You not understand? Speak up if you don't, because I just bulldoze my way along. And since, if you look at gerontology, and you look at the way in which aging is seen in our society, you will see that it is presented as a problem. Aging is a problem. It is seen as something in which most of the depictions of aging show that suffering is inherent in aging. It's inherent in the way things change, in loss, in grief, in and fear of death. So, my speculation was that it would be possible to bring that kind of inner practice and inner awareness to bear on the phenomena that we call aging. All of them, the body, the social, the whole psychological, the mental, all of it, in such a way that the phenomena would not overwhelm, contract, they would not define me. In other words, the identity between the I that is aware and the me that is aging would not be an identity, would not be isomorphic. For example, I have a 22-year-old MG-B, and I have refurbished it at great expense continuously. And it's a lovely, lovely car. It's got metal bumpers, the real good kind. Those of you that are aficionados know what that means. Now, I love that car, but when something goes wrong with it, it isn't me, it's my MG. Now, there are people for whom their car is an extension of themselves. You probably know one. You might even be one. I am not that person. The car is the car. A car is metal, and it's going to turn, and it'll do what it can, and I'll refurbish it, and then slowly I won't, and then they'll crush it and make another car out of it. So when my car gets a scratch, I don't go, oof. The question is, what is the relation of the body to I in the relation of the MG to me? How does that all work? Now, what has appeared in recent years, we went through a series, if you look at the history of things, first of all, we started to understand with our minds, our intellect, about outward phenomena. And we built physics and chemistry and biology, labeling, categorizing, studying relationships among things. And then we started to apply that to the human psyche. We started to study the way humans behave. And we built a whole social science around that, sociology, anthropology, psychology, around that. And the way we tried to emulate the sciences of biology and physics and chemistry with psychology was through behaviorism, through studying what was public and what was repeatable and what was seen from outside. And we made ourselves into objects to be studied. So psychology was the study of human objects, really, in the behaviorist day. And then in the 50s, 60s, 70s, along came humanistic psychology with Abe Maslow and Tony Sudich and a number of people like that. And they, in effect, said, we are losing the human being into the science of the human being. We're losing what's human about us. Now, the humanists are people that are concerned with ethics, morals, emotional experiences, the whole psychodynamics of us. But the predicament is that there is another element of us. There's another level or another part of our existence as humans that has variously been called spiritual or been called other states of consciousness or something or other. And only in the recent years, maybe the last 10, 15, 20 years, has that started to be recognized in what's called transpersonal psychology. So I'm bringing you up to date from our Western point of view that we are starting now to build a psychology or build a study of the human being that honors both your physical body, your psychodynamics, and also something else. And in a way, it is the transpersonal realm that I want to speak about now. Because, put very baldly, the plane or sphere or realm of consciousness that you and I meet in Clearwater, Florida. Got to get rid of my Boston accent, Florida. Everybody's from Boston anyway, so. We meet in Clearwater, Florida, as men and women in this establishment, this incredible edifice. All of this is basically one plane of consciousness. It could be called one channel on your television receiver. And inherent in that plane or channel, on that channel are television shows like As the World Turns. And you're in it. You're the leading figure in it. Will I, won't I, can I, can't I? Oh my God, look at those wrinkles. Oh, should I, shouldn't I? On and on. It is our psychodynamic storyline. And I would say that as long as you dwell on that channel, you will suffer when you age, and you will suffer as you approach death. And therefore, what our meeting is about, I keep trying to edge up to what I'm trying to do this weekend. What our meeting is about is understanding that if we were to want to end our own suffering about the process of aging and dying, that we must be willing to explore our identity on other planes of consciousness. That's but roughly the topic. Hello. This isn't going to be profound. I just want to start to play with some form for you to think about this. We're going to talk primarily about all you have here are three circles, concentric circles. One is E, one is S, and one is A. So if you can't see them, you didn't miss much. Is everybody all right so far? Huh? Okay. Okay. We'll do a stretch in maybe half hour or so. If you have to go to the bathroom, just cross your legs. And think dry thoughts. When you and I were born, well, let me not presume about you. When I was born, I came out of a space that I don't really remember, that was perhaps warm and cuddly, the womb. And it was, whatever it was, my needs were being fulfilled. I was in some kind of balance and harmony with my environment, and I had no sense of myself at all. I was just part of things like trees are or rivers are. And then I came out into the delivery room at the hospital where babies were born in the days I was born. And the doctor held me up in the fluorescent lights and slapped my behind and gave me his blessing. And I was off and running, crying. I could imagine why I was crying. The shock of the light and the slap and this wasn't what I was used to. Now I'm romanticizing, but that's okay. Now, I had a very attentive mother, so that she watched me very carefully. So every time I needed something, when I was wet or hungry or something, she was there. She was there with her breast or with dry diapers or whatever, because she was a very, quote, good mother. And for the first month or 3 months maybe, I was very little aware that there was anything other than this continuation of what I'd had before, which was no me and no other, just stuff happening. It was just light or shadow, or, I didn't even have light and shadow. There were phenomena occurring. I had no control. There was nothing about power. None of that existed. But somewhere along the way, the experiences started to happen where there would be a discomfort, a peristaltic contraction in my stomach or a wet diaper or something that was unpleasant. And there would be a semi-instinctual, I don't think it's really instinctual, but semi-instinctual response of crying to that. And usually what would happen was the crying would bring a response, and I hadn't yet learned that association yet, but it did. But then sometimes the crying didn't bring the response because my mother had 2 other children. There were other things to do. And based on that non-100% reinforcement, I started to learn a certain set of social behaviors. I started to learn that there was other. That while I could pinch this and it felt a certain way, if I pinched this, it didn't feel that way, it felt different. And I started to discriminate between one thing and another. And I started to develop a social awareness. Now, it wasn't social in the sense of, hi, Ma, but it was a sense that my gratification or my feeling of being back at home or safe or warm or comfortable somehow had to do with what I did in relationship to another human being. I didn't know they were human, and I didn't know any of that. We're going way back now. You with me on this? And I slowly developed a sense of relationship to other. And that if I cried in a certain way, in a particularly obnoxious way, it got a response sooner. And I developed my behaviors to elicit responses, and I started to learn how to play in that environment. And I became the rudimentary beginnings of a social being. I mean, a lot of times when, at a very new baby, when you say, oh, you're smiling, it's, as you know, a gas bubble. Because the smile of, hi there, I'm in here, is probably not very developed at that stage. Although, we're going to talk about old souls in a minute. Now, based on that little beginning learning of other, of action leading to reaction from the environment that's separate from yourself, a whole set of learning patterns get laid down. They did for me anyway. Because not only did I learn that what I did affected something in my environment, but my mother, she knew, but she learned again that what she did affected something in her environment, which was this crying, peeing entity that she was loving so much. And thus begins the dance of socialization. Thus begins the dance in which the parent and the child interact in such a way that the parent molds the child to become a social entity, and the child molds the parent to fulfill their needs as well as possible. Okay? But do you see that all of that learning, like, that's an elephant. Elephant? Oh, good. That's elephant, right. Ma. Oh, it knows me. I mean, I'm just trying to give you the little examples of what all that stuff feels like, of the beginning of that social dance. And you see that that you're learning, the conceptual model of reality that you're building from that very rudimentary beginning is rooted in a social context. It's a relational root that is underlying the learning. Now, the reason I belabor that point is that when you get older people to list the major, quote, problems with aging, the list includes loneliness, alienation, isolation, lack of respect. You look at the list and see how much of it is social stuff. And you realize that the reason that's so important to that human being is because you go back of where it got laid down in the first place. That our entire structure of what, and now I'm going to use the word, which is a very mixed, complex word, and I'm using it in a very loose way, not in the precise way that Freud uses it, but using it this way, the way in which our phenomenal field, or what we could call our ego, is laid down. And the ego is not just me, it is how the world looks. Like if I look out here, I don't see, when I look at you, I don't see shadows and light. I see woman. And I've learned thousands, millions of discriminations. This from that from that, in order to function. I have learned an entire computer program. I have developed software for functioning on this plane of existence. In other words, through that relational beginning, which then got transferred to surrogates for that person that could make me feel that way good, which then were teachers with grades, which were friends, which were people who could do something, because constantly the motivation we were working with was the anxiety of loss or fear or isolation or suffering, and the coming back into a harmonious field of being in balance. And you can manipulate that and socialize somebody with that. I'm oversimplifying, believe me, I am. But to recognize that our ego structures and our social, intellectual, conceptual, analytic, cognizing nature of the definition of who we are, who you are, how it all works, what to do, how to turn on the key, how to start, how to do this and that, all of that is rooted in a social identity, because that's the kind of reinforcements that have been used to train us. Roughly, we grow up, and not all of us, and we'll talk about individual differences, but we grow up looking into other human beings' eyes to find out whether we're doing okay. Am I good? Am I enough? Did I do it right? Am I part of the system? Do you accept me as one of your own? And for many, many people, even if they are very winning and they know it and they're smart and everything, everybody says, you're one of us, it only lasts for a second. And then the deeper thing of I've got to do something to reassure myself it's okay starts again. And that particular sequence, and I'm jumping and I'm doing very short circuit stuff because I want to get on with it. I don't want to belabor psychology today. That most people have built, it's like the blankets on top of the pea for the princess. The thing that's in there that is disruptive of the whole game, but that makes the game work, is that we come into a power domain in which external to ourselves are vast power, and internal to ourselves is not. And we develop a sense of inadequacy, a sense of that we have to placate the powers that be in order to survive. Now, I'm overstating it, but you can find in yourself, as in most people, a socialization, you will find some of that. I had an extraordinary experience some years back. I was touring Hawaii, and I went to and I was invited to go to the Big Island to meet with a meditation group. That was what the letter said. And I had a speaking engagement on Maui and one on Oahu, and I thought, well, I've never been to the Big Island, and here's a nice meditation group, and I'll go and meditate with them for an evening. So I said, okay, and I landed at the Hilo Airport, or whichever one it was. And I was met by three very strange people. They had a big one-ton truck, and there was an older man and a young couple, and they were very silent. And we got in the car, and we started to drive, I knew not where. I mean, this is total trust. We're driving, and they're saying nothing. And I'm saying things, and everything I say is just sitting there in the air. And okay, they're not telling me where we're going or who they are or, hello, what's it like here? Great volcanic, After a while, we drive up into the hills to an old coffee plantation. And we get out and they say, you'll stay here. And they show me a beautiful outdoor room with bougainvillea and very lovely. And they say, why don't you take a rest and then we'll meet you later. So I lie down to rest and I suddenly realize there are people walking around the paths. And there's something very strange. I don't understand what it is, but it's very strange. And they're going, oh, when they meet each other. Well, people are peculiar, what the hell? So I rest, and then I go down to visit the man who's the sort of head honcho who picked me up, and he's sitting in his room, and I come in and I sit down, and I'm all rested, and here we are, and he goes, "Up." So, it's an interesting moment, and I went, I figured I'd play it safe from a Hindu point of view. I went, Om, So I thought, maybe he has some nervous thing, and I don't want to make fun of it. I mean, I don't know what's going on with this guy. So I said, Om. And then he said, Om, 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 Om. And I realized that what he wanted was for us to develop our own language. And I thought, that'll be fun. So we were busy developing our own language, and it was, And then a beautiful young woman came in with a big thing of fruit, and we had fruit, and it was lovely. And the room had a curtain right here. And after about 40 minutes of fruit and language, he said, well, I think we're ready now. I didn't know for what. And he pulled back the curtain, and there were about 30 people sitting right there on the other side of the curtain, totally silent. I mean, how they got there, what they were doing there, I had no idea. And he turned, and everybody looked at me, and it was clear that I was to begin doing whatever it was I was here to do. So, I've been on the road for many years, and I'm really a master at being charming. So I was charming. I told stories, and I was charming, and, and all this stuff. And they all sat there like this. And after quite a while, one of them raised his hand, and he said, Ram Dass, I've read your book, Be Here Now, and it's very helpful. Why aren't you like your book? Oof. And then another one said, Ram Dass, I don't feel very good here. And I started to feel very uneasy. And one by one, they started to attack me. And they attacked me, and this doctor, or whoever he was, the meditation leader, sat there and let them do this to me. And it went on, and I got more and more defensive, and I started to fight back, saying, look, you just invited me here to lead a meditation. I don't know what and oh boy, they got me. They really had me. And it went on till maybe 11:30 at night. And then this man says, well, I think we've gone as far as we can go tonight. Now, I'm up in a coffee plantation in the pitch dark. I don't know where I am. I just can't run. There's no way I can get out of this thing. I've promised that I would be there overnight and I'd leave the next morning. So I go back to my room, and I am furious. And as I quiet down and look at the beautiful night, I realize, and they've been saying, you're very defensive, and I realize they're right. That I hate them for the way they're doing it, but they are right. They got me. And I hate admitting it. It's very hard not to be righteously indignant. So the next morning I go back in at 7:30 and I say, I want you all to know you were right last night. I was very defensive and I'd like your help. Help me. Well, that's just what they wanted to hear. So they said, well, start telling us all the terrible things in your life. And I started to tell everything I could think of. And I got further and further on. Then they said, well, now start a scream. So I started to scream. This is about 8 in the morning. And then they lay me down, and they all came up, and they all put their hands on me, and they had me make fists and start a scream. And I was screaming and screaming and screaming, and suddenly my consciousness shifted, and I was back in my crib, and I was having a temper tantrum. I could see the sun coming in the window, the whole image of, it was from inside that place. I was having a temper tantrum, and my mother had her hand on my chest, and she was holding me down, and she was looking at me coldly. And I realized that that was a moment in which I had lost my power. Is this too clinical? Can you hear what I'm trying to tell you? That I suddenly saw the way in which I had, that my independence and my strength, and when I defined my strength, my mother had overwhelmed me. And after that, I would only have power if she gave it to me. She or a surrogate of her. And that's how I became a professor at Harvard. Basically. If you follow it through, I can show you how, if you want to take the boring trip of how you get so that you learn how to get the gold stars and then the A's and then the thises and the that's, and you go on, and you're constantly, can I express myself? Am I good? Am I all right? Can I have my power back? And so you can understand how a person like me, or people that are others that are like me, might get obsessed with power, might want power, because you're a little entity. Because what happened when you started to develop this conceptual model of the universe, you began to define me and not me. And the predicament is, me is very little and not me is very big. Not me is not only the social thing, the parents, but it's lightning and thunderstorms. It's phenomena out in the world. It's everything. Everything is big and powerful, and you are, as a separate entity, little and vulnerable. And the way I've talked about it in the past is that when you were born, after a little while, you went into somebody training. You learned to be somebody, to be a separate entity. This is me and that's not me. And when you learn that, the part that ends up me is very little and very vulnerable in the face of great power. And what you keep cultivating is more and more power through control, through defining the boundaries of your reality, through a whole set of social and intellectual techniques in order to feel safe in what is basically a threatening or an unknown or an uncertain universe, in order to survive as a separate entity. So you end up with your tract of land, and it's mowed to the edge, and you know where your checkbook is, and you've got your will written, and you've got your IRAs in order, and your laundry is clean, and you know what you're going to eat for dinner, and you slowly create a controlled environment in which you feel safe. And then you try to do it as a country. The United States tries to create a place where it feels safe as a country, where you feel safe as an American. And on, through all your reference groups, family, religion, all of these things. And a tremendous amount of strife, ethnic cleansing, all of this, is people's identity either with their separate entity or with, because what happens is, in order to feel more powerful than you feel as a separate entity, you start to identify with groups, with family, with ethnic group, with nation state, with gender, with something, in order to have a larger reference group to feel safe within that group. That group, the church will be safe even if I'm not. It's just going to get good now. But I really want you to have this is not novel to you, and this isn't a particularly sophisticated presentation of what I'm presenting about the development of our sense of self, our ego structure, our social identity, our separateness. And after you've been trained to be a separate entity, then you and I went into somebody special training. Now you're not only somebody, you're somebody special. And aren't you somebody special? Didn't you go into somebody special training? My child is special. So you went from somebody training into somebody special training. And through that specialness, you gained new kinds of power, recognition, acceptance, love, gold stars, whatever. Now, in view of how that all developed, can you see how threatening it must be when it all starts to fall apart? Because you're inside there. That's who you are. And the whole thing doesn't work as well after a while. So, why don't we stretch for 2 minutes, and I'll give you the next chapter. Don't go too far away, but let's take about a 5-minute stretch. Just long enough to get to the bathroom if you need to go. I was asked what happened to that group in Hawaii after I cried. Well, I left, and they were all hugging and going, and my next meeting was down on the beach with a group from Outward Bound, and I came down and I was like a piece of mashed potato. I mean, I was just mush, holding on to this doctor for dear life because I had just broken through somewhere. I was crying and dribbling out of my nose and peeing in my pants and everything, and then the Outward Bound came over of, "Hi, Ramdas," and I was holding onto this doctor, and I went to hold him, and he went, "Ah, blah, 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 blah," and I thought, oh, enough already. So just the conclusion of the story, the next year, the doctor died mysteriously, and then about 6 months later, the group wrote and asked me if I would come down and take over the group, which I declined, and that was the end of that story. I'm trapped because there are a lot of things, there are a lot of little peripheral things that I'm leaving out that I'd like to go into that are a little deeper, but I kind of feel I better go on or we will never be able to do this in the brief time we have together. Maybe there's one other little dimension I will talk about, which is that as you become socialized and develop this construct, this model of yourself and other, we have in our society developed a tremendous a preoccupation with individualism, with us as individuals. And I think it was exacerbated in the 60s, actually, when you had inner experiences, and they were my experiences, and I couldn't worry about you because I had to deal with my own experiences, and the journey of enlightenment was an individual matter, and that led to people being called the narcissistic 70s and all that stuff. But we lost a balance between our identity as separate entities and our identity as members of systems, of groups, which was a little bizarre when you think of where we came from, because in the way I've shown you, our identity was built around our membership in systems. The family, our mother relationship, father, schools, these were the systems of which we were part that in which our identity exists. Our identity as egos is basically a social identity. And yet we also became so concerned with my needs, my desires, am I getting what I want, that in the service of that, we've often sacrificed our membership in other social forms, like a family, like a community. Because the family didn't understand what you were doing as an individual, because across generations there's breakdowns in communication. And in most cultures where the extended family is very tight, there's space for the adolescent to have his independence and still stay within the system, and you're always part of the system. And even when you get old, you're part of the extended family. But when you've thrown over the family structure, then you're really quite alone. And so that one of the major pathologies in our culture has been alienation, or a sense of aloneness. And we have lost the balance between ourselves as separate entities and as members of groups. And we are now creating family surrogates because we have sacrificed family. That is, so we develop new living communities and new social groups, and groups often formed around pathology like AA or something like that, in order to give ourselves a family, a social frame of reference to give meaning to our lives. And that's a kind of a counter theme that's important in understanding this whole weave. And I'll show you how it works later on, I think, if I remember. Okay. Now, everything I have talked about thus far is the inner circle, is the E, which is ego. But now let me weave another story for you. And I'll go back one step back. Now here I'm going to run into some problems with your intellectual predispositions, and that's okay. It's perfectly okay. It's okay. And you'll see the error of your ways before we're done. Because I'm going to use some language that's going to be hard for some of you to work with. And just give me my psychosis for the moment. Just imagine you've come to an interesting, you're seeing some interesting anthropological find. And I'm just here as a weirdo, and people say, did all the drugs affect you? And I say, probably. And they say, did it make you crazy? And I said, well, you paid to hear me. So, because now I will get pummeled for the next step by both the humanists on one side and the Buddhists on the other, but that's okay. We'll make peace in the end, I promise you. Because now I'm going to go back one step to before you were born, before I was born, too. And I'm going to introduce you to another part of your identity, which is basically another plane or realm of consciousness. When I talk about planes or realms, you know, like when you go to sleep and you dream, when you dream, you're tuning into another channel, and on that channel you exist. And when you exist on that channel, you notice this doesn't. And then you wake up and you say, quote, "It was a dream." Understand that you've all had that experience. And then when you go into the dream state, it's actually when you're coming out of another state, which is called deep sleep, where you don't dream. That's yet another plane of consciousness. And we have known for many, many, many years about the fact that there are many channels that our awareness can enter into. But if you look at our society, you will see that what it's done is taken that channel that you can know through your senses and your thinking mind and made that real and made everything else dreamlike or illusory. So that when you have other states of consciousness, you say, quote, "I'm out of my mind, I must have been crazy." You come out of a movie and you don't know where you are. And you say, and you see that as a pathological situation, some problem. Oh, I'm disoriented. And in a society that invests very strongly in the ego structures and our rational analytic mind, anything that the rational mind can't really handle and subsume under itself, we treat as an error or irrelevant, basically. That's very interesting. Because in doing that, we short shrift ourselves incredibly. So let me now work with another word, which I'll take from the religious traditions, the spiritual traditions, the word soul. And if you have reactions to it, just assume you're having reactions to something else, and just listen to it now as a useful word to play with. Let us now say that who you are is a soul. And you are unique as a soul. You are different from other souls. And your uniqueness lies in what in the East is called karma. That is, your uniqueness lies in what also could be called psychic DNA. That is, it's a set of predispositions that exist within the soul that make it unique. Those predispositions have to do with what are called attractions and aversions. And the soul, in the way it works through its karma or its predispositions, is by taking forms or making form, projecting forms, and working through the experiences within those forms. So now imagine that you as a soul took birth as a human being and developed an ego as a human being in order to work out the karma of the soul. Okay? Just allow for that, for the possibility. This is just a theoretical speculation. Okay? Don't think it's real, because you aren't, so it doesn't matter. It is or it isn't. Oh, I'm bad. I can see that. So, now, I'm making a very clear distinction between the soul and the personality, or the soul and the ego structures. And the ego structure and this physical, psychological plane in which you took birth, living your life, going through your stuff, your sorrows and your beauty and your stuff, and then dealing with aging and death, is all part of the curriculum of the soul. Now I'm calling upon a different part of you. I'm asking you as a soul to look at your whole human birth as if it is a curriculum through which you as a soul can work through or get free of your karma. Meaning your patterns of attractions and aversions that keep you caught in separateness, from the totality. Put in religious terms, you became separated from God. That's one way of saying that. You are a part of God, but separate. The separateness is defined by your unique patterns of aversion and attraction. As you work those all out, you come closer to God. So, to look now at this sequence, you would say that the ego is living its life, having its experiences. From the soul's point of view, all of this is the stuff through which the soul is working out its karma. The soul is still a unique entity. By the way, the soul is not just working out its stuff on this plane of existence. It's working out its stuff through your dreams and through many other planes of consciousness as well. And if you really study altered states of consciousness, whether you study it through metaphysics, through theology, through psychedelics, through meditation, through whatever spiritual techniques, all of mystic traditions, you will find many, many, many planes of consciousness. And I must say to you that you exist simultaneously on all these planes of consciousness. The only predicament is that your preoccupation with this plane makes you not notice these other planes. It's like because when you're living in a city where there's street lights and many lights, you don't see the stars. It's only you see the stars when you start to quiet this one down a little bit and get out in the country, where you then remember that you're part of a much bigger cosmos. And so in the same way, this is ruled, the computer central of this, of the ego, is basically the analytic, intellectual mind. And the mind treats the soul as a figment of the mind's imagination designed to ward off anxiety. Okay? If you study Freudian theory, for example, you will see that he saw all religious experience as a defense mechanism and as a displacement of basically libidinal energy, or what he called sexual energy. And it was designed in order to alleviate the fear of death. And it was created by the human mind. In other words, there was no system. If you understand logic at all, you understand that there are systems, and then there are what are called meta-systems. That means there are larger systems that encompass the smaller systems. And then there are meta systems that encompass the smaller systems and the smaller systems. So the rational mind is one of the smaller systems, and yet you've been running your life by it, and it's how you've been defining yourself. And the meta-system to that is the soul. And there is a meta-system to that, which you could call God. We'll discuss that in a minute, what we'll call it. And the predicament is that a subsystem can never fully understand a system meta to it because it contains more than the subsystem contains. So what the rational mind does is try to cram the mystery of the universe into what it knows it knows. And everything it can't know at that moment, it treats as irrelevant or error, basically. I mean, what happened to me was that I was a professor of psychology at Harvard, teaching what we in the West, with our rational, analytic, behaviorist minds, thought the human being was about. And I was quite good at it. The predicament was that even though I taught all this stuff and even did therapy from that place, basically it was not touching the truth of my being. I was still hungry at the end of the day, in a deep heart sense. I was very bright and sharp, and everybody said, "Isn't he bright and sharp?" And I was with other bright people that said, "You're bright." "Well, no, you're bright." And on and on and on we went, reassuring each other we were all very bright. The problem was that when I got into the bathtub at night, I was just as neurotic as I was in the morning, and yet all day long I had been busy being wise about psychology. And for me, the experience that changed me was the Tiananactala mushroom, psychedelic mushroom, which in a matter of 5 or 6 hours showed me that I had been much too narrowly conceiving of myself. It cast me back into my soul identity, at least at one level, and I suddenly recognized a deeper identity that I had from which this thinking mind was a subsystem. Now have I pushed you too far? Are you still with me, or is it getting... Because if it's getting weird, let me know, okay? Because I never know. It all seems weird to me. Now, another way of getting at this through stages is through the term witness. This is a way that has been used by, like Gurdjieff, the Russian mystic philosopher. If I am talking to you now, as I am, I put my leg up, I'm holding the microphone in my hand, and you are listening. So you are an audience and I am a speaker. Now, I can cultivate a part of my thinking mind that is sitting right here, not physically here, but sitting in a psychological relationship here, watching this whole process going on. You can do the same thing for yourself all the time. You cultivate a witness that is watching. You can say, now I am eating. Now I am walking. We often call it self-consciousness. The problem with self-consciousness is it has an evaluative component in it too, a judging thing. I'm self-conscious, meaning I think I'm not good enough. But basically, the witness is a part of our mind that witnesses the rest of what's going on. And this is a spiritual practice or a device, because what spiritual now means is S and whatever's beyond it. It means other than ego. It means other than that plane of existence. And don't get upset if I seem to be saying that the ego isn't spiritual, because later we'll bring it all back. We got to get out first. I'll take you the whole ball of wax at the beginning, and then you'll see where we're going, because I don't see why I should know and you shouldn't. Basically, for a mystery that you cannot plumb with the mind that we can talk with here, wait a minute. The universe, the non-conceptual universe, the world that is not in form, manifests into form. Why that happens I can give you 100 answers, and all of them are inadequate. In other words, why did it all begin? Who thought up this mess? Why are we here? What's this form all about? What is incarnation? What is life? What is materiality? Buddha says it's none of your business. And he doesn't mean it in a perverse sense. He just means your rational mind can't understand it because the system is too big. That's the whole game of a mystery. That's why, for example, in Judaism, the word God cannot be spoken because it is beyond words. It's taking you constantly. All of religions and all of traditions are pointing at that which is unspeakable because it lies behind what's speakable. It lies in the non-conceptual world. It's what Jesus says, I and my Father are one, and that's in a non-conceptual space. It's Brahma in Hinduism. That unmanifest manifests. And the predicament with my saying even that is it implies time, and there is not time in these other dimensions, in some of these other dimensions. So it looks like the word in the Bible, in the beginning God created, as if there was a time before in the beginning and there'll be a time after in the beginning. But that's all a metaphorical system in some way because form and formless, as you learn in, say, the Heart Sutra in Tibetan Buddhism, are one and the same thing. Form is no other than emptiness. Emptiness is no other than form. And our minds, our rational minds, tend to be in time, so we think in terms of beginning, middle, and end, and what happened first and what's going to happen. But it's much more interesting mystically when I say it always was here and it always wasn't here. That's a mystical statement. Now the witness, which is part of the mind and watches the rest of it, you can cultivate that. For example, the morning meditation we did, when we did the mantra Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram, Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram, Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram. I have basically been doing that mantra since 67. So that's 28 years. And I've done it at night and in the daytime. When I waken during the night, it comes into my mind. And what has happened is it has been my vehicle for connecting me to this S level, at least. We'll go beyond that in a minute, but the S level, the soul level. So here's an example, and the one I've used in the past. I'm at the checkout counter at a supermarket. Well, I'm actually the third person in line. It's late in the afternoon. I'm tired. I've had a long day. I want to go home. I've got my groceries for dinner. I'm waiting to check out. The person at the head of the line has a very large order. So I'm standing there, and the order comes to $120 some odd. She's told that. And then she takes out a voluminous bag, and she starts to rummage in the bag for not her cash, but her checkbook. When she finds her checkbook, she then has to rummage to find her fountain pen. She's been standing there all this time. When she finds her fountain pen, she then starts to fill out the check. She not only fills out the check, she fills out the checkbook as well. I mean, I'm sure you're all aware of just what I'm talking about at this moment. I am standing 3 people back from her, steaming. How inconsiderate. Couldn't she have... Right, I'm hungry. Okay. In my hand are my beads. I'm going along being angry, and suddenly I feel a bead under my finger. When I feel the bead, up comes Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram. At that moment, there is what you would call you'd call a figure ground reversal. That is, what was figure, meaning this woman being irresponsible and me being tired, suddenly becomes ground. And what becomes figure is this soul and the dance of souls on earth. And I'm standing there, and whether I get home and eat or don't get home or eat isn't any longer the issue. The issue is how caught I got in the situation. And just all those beads did was remind me how caught I had gotten. In other words, they awakened me. It's like saying to the soul, really got caught in your incarnation, didn't you? You really took it seriously, didn't you? You really bought into the melodrama, didn't you? I mean, you've got to understand how much, because of this perceptual vantage point, I infuriate people. Somebody comes to me and they say, should I marry or not, Ram Dass? Now as the world turns, that's a big question. And I say, doesn't matter. Now, they're affronted because, well, it matters to me, they say. I say, well, that's your problem. Now, am I just being a wise guy, facetious? Yes, but not only. I'm also saying that from a soul's point of view, whatever you do is going to be interesting. Whatever you do in your lifetime is going to have impact, effects, create causes. It's going to unfold in a way to give you a teaching. If you're asking, should I marry or not, there's part of you that doesn't want to and part of you that does. So if you marry, the part of you that does is happy and the part of you that doesn't want to is miserable. If you don't marry, the part of you that doesn't want to is happy and the part of you that wanted to is miserable. Now, are you going to learn more from one or the other? From a soul's point of view, you are going to learn from both of them. So as a soul to another soul, I'd say it doesn't matter. But somebody says, I'm not a soul, I'm a personality. Do you hear what they're saying? They're saying, I am my own creation. Don't talk to me at the next level up, because that isn't who I am. And I say, I'll wait. I'll wait. What's the rush? You got all the time in the world, because there's no time. Well, I won't push the mystical thing too fast or too far. But what in effect I'm saying is that there is a way of looking at your life from a vantage point that makes your life experiences the material, the stuff, the richness through which you grow. And I don't mean grow as an ego, I mean become free as a soul. And what I am further saying to you is that it is only through your identity as a soul that you can age without suffering. Because the aging process itself becomes the stuff, the grist for the mill of the soul's awakening. See, when I stood on the checkout counter, I was angry. I was attached to a model of I'm going to get my food, get home, eat, and then I'll get on to television or whatever I'm going to do. I had an expectation, a model to which I was attached. That situation caught me in my attachment. The mantra and the beads or my practice, whatever it was, awakened me to the way in which I was trapped in my attraction or aversion or my model of reality. And it allowed me to let go into the moment, because in the moment we are all standing in the supermarket forever. This is all what it is. I mean, you look at your life and you'll see it as just one thing after another. And if you watch what happens when people are young, they don't live in this moment. They're living in the future. Well, as soon as I get my food, I can go home, and then I'll cook dinner, and then I'll get done, and then I'll be in time to see Murder, She Wrote, and then I can get and answer some letters, and then and I missed this moment. Then as you get older, what happens is you start to rehearse the past because you don't have much future. So you start to rehearse the past and you say, oh, and you go and let me tell you about that time. And again, you miss the present moment. So I'm bringing in another topic here, time, which we will play with a little bit more as the weekend progresses. But what I am now saying to you is that whether we talk about planes of consciousness and talk about these as planes of consciousness, or whether we talk about these in spiritual terms and talk about soul and ego, and then we'll come to this A in a second, what we're dealing with basically is a shift in perspective where you begin to acknowledge a deeper part of your own identity on another plane of consciousness, which changes the meaning of your life experiences on this plane of consciousness. I have this spook friend, Emmanuel, and some of you have read some of the books that have come from Pat Rodegast and Judith Stanton, in which Emmanuel has spoken to us. Emmanuel is a delightful being. He isn't in a body at the moment, but that's wonderful because very rarely do you have friends that aren't embodied to hang out with. And the one many of you know is when I said to Emmanuel, I work with people around death and dying. What should I tell them about it? He said, Ram Dass, tell them that death is absolutely safe. He said it's like taking off a tight shoe. Now, who's taking off the shoe? In India, they talk about death as dropping the body. Who drops the body? If I am my body, how can I drop it? When it drops, I drop. I want you to see the predicament that a philosophical, materialist society like ours is trapped in. If you've put all your eggs in the basket that I am my body and I am my personality and my thinking mind and my senses, believe me, when that goes, you're gone. And most people have a deep fear of death because they won't exist according to their model of reality. Now, I'm going to give you temporary surcease from that suffering. It is temporary, as those of you that know what A is about can suspect. But within this system, I will tell you that your soul will transcend your physical death. Now, you say to me, how do you know that? Come on, how do you know that? And the answer is, I don't. Because I'm not a dead teacher. What I have, I'm really pushing you very hard. I am really pushing. What I have is a combination of a set of experiences of my awareness moving to other planes. I have spent years hanging around very wise beings who know more about the universe than I do, who have told me about this. And all of the great books in the mystic traditions that I have read that underlie every basic religion have all supported the idea that the forms that we see through our senses and our thinking mind are really just one channel of the dance. And that our identity with that, it's just like if I identify with my MG and my MG gets totaled, I don't exist. But if I understand that my MG is just my car, then I can sell my car or drop it, and I continue. Now, just to give you the full blast here, because this is a little complicated, if this weren't already. The soul has, what is the soul's curriculum? That's you. What is your curriculum as a soul? Your curriculum is to work out the karma that makes up your existence, your attractions and your aversions. And you're doing that. The soul is working out its karma through this plane and through many, many other planes. Dream states, archetypal stuff, all kinds of planes of consciousness. Working it out means extricating yourself from being trapped in attraction or aversion, so you're not pushing or pulling. The soul has one other thing. Just like when I was born and I felt that hunger when I was separate from my mother and I wanted to get back to the breast, to the feeling of completeness and totality. So any separate thing within the system is also part of the whole system, but yet is experiencing itself as separate from that system. And therefore, the soul is, at the same moment as it's working out all of the stuff that is keeping it separate, it is yearning to return to its source, or the return to God, or the return to the One, or however you want to call that. And just for a moment, if you